G'day and welcome to the Idiot's Guide to Basic Photography Principles for the Purposes of Photogrammetry. My name is Kevin Nevart. I work at Swinburne University of Technology in the Smart Structures Laboratory. I'm one of the technicians here, breaking things and doing, break stuff. The purpose of this video is really to explain some basic photography principles for people who want to use some photogrammetry systems. This really is not aimed at people who know anything about photography at all. It's really aimed at people who know nothing about photography other than the auto button. We're going to talk about a few things in this video. We're going to talk about focal length, we're going to talk about aperture, and we're going to talk about shutter speeds. There's all sorts of other interesting things about photography, which would be great to get into, but they really have no relevance to us right here today. If you want to get into that stuff, there's plenty of tutorials online. The main reason we want to talk about photography here is for use of, here at Swinburne we own a Correlated Solutions VIC-3D digital image correlation system. This is a stereoscopic photogrammetry system that uses two different cameras at known positions in order to obtain 3 dimensions worth of information, and by comparing the first image with all sorts of subsequent images you can pick up all sorts of stresses and strains, and it's pretty damn cool stuff. But in order to be able to use it you need to know a little bit about photography, and so that's where we're going to start today. First off, we'll talk about focal length. Focal length, at least in terms of our photogrammetry systems here, we have a number of different sized lenses, ranging from memory 8mm at the widest angle to 35mm, I believe, at the shallowest angle, the highest zoom. Now, what does that all mean? When we're looking at focal length, we are actually looking at it is defined as the distance between the image sensor and the focal point of the lens itself. The shorter that distance, the wider these angles become, and that width of angle becomes important when dealing, when choosing the lens that you wish to use, but also has implications for things like perspective. As you can see, a smaller focal length results in a wider viewing angle. A higher focal length results in a narrower viewing angle, and a narrower viewing angle results in a more zoomed in image. Here's an example just plucked from the web of different angles versus their focal lengths. Now this is only true for certain image sensor sizes. In this case it's saying 35mm film. You don't need to worry about any of that. You just need to realize that the standard principle applies. Shorter the focal length, wider the viewing angle. Higher the focal length, narrower viewing angle, which is more zoomed in. And here's some examples actually of photos taken from the same point, but with greater focal lengths. Now, focal length also has an effect on perspective, and this can be seen in this following image. We have a zoom lens here, so a high focal length, and we have a wide angle lens down here, so a small focal length. And what's happened in both of these images is that the camera has been placed in such a position so as that the main subject of the photo is kept at the same relative size. That's the main subject there, and they're both at the same size. However, look at the secondary subject, which is behind, the background subject. In the case of this zoom lens here, it looks as though the person behind, it doesn't look that much smaller due to the perspective. However, in a wide angle shot, he looks like he's much further away, and this is just due to the way that the rays of light emanate from the camera. Well, they don't emanate from the camera, but you know what I mean. This has important implications for your photogrammetry setups. Sometimes you need to pick up a larger depth of specimen. Oftentimes though, you don't care at all. Oftentimes you're just picking up on a single plane. Here's an example of focal lengths versus their effects on perspective. And you've got a very short focal length here, so a very wide angle. So this guy would have been sitting very close to the target image, to the subject of the image. compared to over here, this guy would have been sitting much further away compared to the subject. But you can see the effect of perspective in the background. It's quite dramatic. So again, this may have implications for you for your specimens if you wish to measure something which has a large Z component in it. Aperture. Aperture really refers to the size of the opening which allows light to come into the lens. They're measured in f-stops. In this particular image, we're looking at a 28mm focal length lens, seen here. So that's a fixed focal length lens. And here is at f over 2.8, and here is at f on 22. We don't really need, there's all sorts of formulas which control these things, but we really don't need to know anything about that. All we need to know for the purposes of what we're trying to do is lower the number, the more light comes in. Higher the number, less light comes in. Now, aperture has a very large effect on the depth of field. What is the depth of field, you ask? Very good question. In this top example, we are focused on this yellow light bulb here. And so what the depth of field refers to is how far in front and how far behind this object will subjects still be in focus. Now, with a large aperture, the depth of field, signified by these two lines here, is actually very narrow. A little bit in this case, a little bit in front, and we're out of focus, and a little bit behind, and we're well out of focus. And that's due to these lines of divergence here created by this large opening. That divergence angle is quite large, which minimizes that depth of field. Now, in this below example, we have a small aperture, which therefore means the lines, the light ray lines, gives us a much smaller angle of divergence, which therefore means that images in front or behind will appear to be much more in focus. So the takeaway from this is if you need to measure a subject which has a large Z component in it, then you need to have a small aperture. Now, the problem with small aperture is that the smaller that light is, the smaller that hole is, the less light comes in. Now, here's just another example of this depth of field in action. Over here we have an f1.4, and we see we're focused heavily on the 120mm mark, and we lose focus very, very quickly as we come towards. We lose focus very, very quickly as we come away. As the f numbers grow larger and larger and larger, this depth of focus, depth of field gets larger and larger until we're at f16 here. We're probably out of focus at about, I don't know, 5-10mm there, and out of focus up at this end, I don't know, maybe 280mm. Now, that said though, this is a small opening, so there's not much light can come in. This is a large opening, so it's a lot of light that can come in. So in order to expose your photos correctly, you need to adjust one other parameter, and that is the shutter speed. Here's just a very quick guide to shutter speeds, and these are shutter speeds measured in seconds, 1/8000th of a second, 1/4000th of a second, for example. And here's just some examples. What the photographer has done here as well is he's also actually adjusted, he's either adjusted ISO speed or he's adjusted the aperture in order to maintain the same exposure levels, but we won't worry about that too much just yet. Important thing to note though is that the faster the shutter speed, the more you can stop time and the more features come, the less motion blur you get. The longer you hold that shutter speed open, or the longer you hold that shutter open, so the longer the light is allowed to come in, the more light from different times come in as well, which leads to an effect of motion blur. And this is why nighttime photography tends to be so blurry, especially when you're using your camera on auto settings. What's typically happening is that this speed is getting slowed down, and because you're holding your camera or your phone in your hand movement tends to make it for a blurry image, so that's why that happens.